It's 1910, Reno, Nevada. The summer heat is brutal. The air smells like dust and rage. And inside that boxing ring, under the open sky, a man is standing in front of 18,000 people who want to see him destroyed. Not just defeated, destroyed. They didn't just want him to lose the fight. They wanted to watch him crumble. They wanted to see him scream, panic, bleed, beg. Every single person in that crowd had come for one reason: to watch Jack Johnson finally break, to watch a black heavyweight champion be publicly, violently, humiliatingly taken apart by a man they called the Great White Hope. Let that settle in for a second. 18,000 people, one man, and the man they chose to destroy him had been specially pulled out of retirement. A former champion, bigger, heavier, with reach and power, and the full burning fury of a crowd behind him. The referee looked the other way when the punches landed below the belt. The rules didn't apply. The system didn't care. The whole world, in that moment, was arranged against one man. And you know what Jack Johnson did? He smiled. He didn't rage. He didn't panic. He didn't lose his footing, or his breathing, or his mind. In the fourth round, a punch caught him clean and split his lip open, blood running down his chin, the crowd erupting, and Johnson smiled, wide, almost lazy, like someone had told him a joke he'd already heard 1,000 times, and he found it charming, not threatening, like the whole spectacle, the screaming, the cheating, the hatred, was just background noise in a story whose ending he had already decided. Round after round, as the crowd howled and the opponent cheated, and the whole arena shook with fury, Jack Johnson grew calmer, more precise, more dangerous, while his opponent grew tighter, more frantic, more desperate, more exhausted by his own anger. Johnson was coiling, patient, watching, and in the later rounds, when the other man had burned himself out on his own frustration and fury, Johnson struck with absolute, controlled, deliberate power. The fight had to be stopped before the knockout. Not because Johnson was losing, but because the Great White Hope simply had nothing left. And when Jack Johnson walked out of that ring, the 18,000 people who had come to bury him gave him a standing ovation. That is the power of self-control. Not just self-control as a productivity trick. Not self-control as a buzzword on a motivational poster. I'm talking about the kind of self-control that turns your enemies into your audience. The kind that lets you smile when the world is trying to make you scream. The kind that makes you deadlier when everything around you is falling apart. But here's what I really want to talk to you about today. Because most of us, and I mean most of us, are not Jack Johnson. We are the other fighter. We are the one walking into every ring of our own lives already burning, already flustered, already burning through our energy on anger we can't control, on distractions we can't resist, on impulses we know are hurting us, but we feed them anyway. We are losing fights we should be winning, not because we don't have the talent, not because we don't have the intelligence, but because something inside us keeps sabotaging us at the worst possible moment. And the hardest part, we know it. We know it. That's what makes this so painful. You already know exactly what you should be doing. You know you should be getting up earlier. You know you should be putting down the phone. You know you should be finishing what you started. You know which habits are quietly eating your future from the inside out. You know, and yet you don't. And then you lay awake at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling, and that voice in your head starts again. That relentless, grinding inner voice that says things you'd never say out loud to another human being. I'm such an idiot. Why can't I just do it? Nothing is ever going to change. I've tried before and it never works. Scientists have a name for this. They call it chatter. And chatter is not just an inconvenience. It is not just uncomfortable. Research shows that chatter, that spiral of uncontrolled inner noise, affects your physical health. It prolongs your stress response. It causes inflammation in your body. It damages your cardiovascular system. It strips away your ability to focus, to think clearly, to show up fully for the people you love. Chatter is not just making you feel bad. Chatter is literally making you sick, making you smaller, making you less than what you are built to be. And here is the cruel irony. The very thing that you most need in order to change your mind is the thing that keeps turning against you at the exact moment change is possible. You felt this. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The moment you decide, truly decide, that's it. Starting Monday, I change. And Monday comes and something in your brain immediately starts negotiating. One more day. You're tired. Just this once. You've had a hard week. One day won't matter. And before you've even gotten out of bed, the war is already lost. Not because you're weak, not because you're broken, but because nobody ever taught you how to fight that particular war. Nobody ever handed you the weapon you actually need. That weapon is self-control. But not the self-control people usually talk about. Not white-knuckling through discomfort. Not gritting your teeth and forcing yourself. I'm talking about something far deeper. Something that changes not just what you do, but who you are. The kind of self-control that makes discipline feel less like a cage and more like wings. Let me tell you about a young man who once stood in the doorway of a factory in Canada. He was barely 21 years old. He'd had to leave school early because his family needed money, and he had no real skills, no qualifications, no technical knowledge. He walked into that factory and asked for work as a machine operator, and the foreman looked at him, this young, uneducated, unqualified boy standing there with nothing but hope on his face, and told him, "You're not even good enough to run a machine," and walked away. That moment could have defined him. That level of rejection, being told to your face that you are not even capable of the most basic labor, that kind of thing gets into your bones. It whispers to you at night. It follows you around. Most people who hear something like that from someone in authority spend the rest of their lives trying to escape that voice, or worse, believing it. But something unusual happened inside this young man. Instead of collapsing into that rejection, something cracked open, a question ignited in his mind, and once it caught fire, it never stopped burning. Why do some people succeed despite enormous obstacles, while others with every advantage still fall behind? That question would not let him sleep. He took laboring jobs, hotel work, truck driving, years of hard, physical, low-paying work. But every night, instead of switching off his brain in front of the television, he was reading, studying, asking questions of anyone who had built something, piecing together, from the rubble of his early failures, a philosophy of success that would eventually change hundreds of thousands of lives. His name was Tracy. The boy who was told he wasn't good enough to run a factory machine went on to build 65 car dealerships across Canada. He did 200 crores in vehicle sales. He moved into real estate, built shopping centers, office buildings, parks, developments spanning the entire country. At the height of his career, he was running 8 companies simultaneously. The man who was told he was not qualified even for basic labor became one of the most respected authorities on personal achievement in the world. And when people looked at his success and called him lucky, he would smile that same smile, the same smile Jack Johnson wore in that ring. Because he knew what they didn't. He knew the secret they had never been taught. And it wasn't talent. It wasn't connections. It wasn't luck. It was self-discipline. The deliberate, daily, relentless practice of choosing the harder thing, of demanding more from yourself than the day before, of refusing to let your impulses drive the vehicle of your life. But here is where the story gets interesting, and this is where I need you to stay with me, because what I'm about to say might be the most important thing you hear today. Tracy didn't always have self-discipline. He built it, piece by piece, in the dark, when no one was watching, through thousands of small, invisible choices that nobody ever applauded. He earned it the same way you build muscle, not through one heroic effort, but through daily, consistent, quiet resistance. And the reason most people never build it is because they fundamentally misunderstand what self-discipline actually is. They think self-discipline means forcing yourself to suffer. They think it means suppressing who you are, grinding yourself down, saying no to everything that feels good. They think of it as a punishment, as restriction, as the opposite of freedom. But that is exactly backwards. Jocko Willink, a Navy SEAL commander who has seen human beings operate under the most extreme conditions imaginable, when lives actually depend on who holds together and who falls apart. Jocko says those three words over and over again, and they've shaken people awake all over the world. Discipline equals freedom. Read that again. Discipline equals freedom. Not restriction, not punishment. Freedom. The freedom that comes from not being enslaved to every impulse, every distraction, every craving, every moment of discomfort that your brain screams at you to escape. The freedom of actually becoming the person you keep saying you want to be. The freedom of closing the gap between the life you're living and the life you know deep down you are capable of. Because here is the painful truth that most of us are running from. You are not living the life you could be living. And you know it. Maybe you don't say it out loud. Maybe you buried it so deep under routine and distraction that you've almost forgotten it's there. But it's there. That quiet ache, that sense that something important is going unused, that your best self is waiting on the other side of a door you keep walking past. And the thing keeping you from walking through that door is not the economy, but it is not your past. It is not the people who hurt you, or the opportunities you missed, or the time you don't have. It is not your circumstances. Those things are real. I'm not dismissing them. Your pain is real. Your obstacles are real. But they are not the final answer. They are not the ceiling. The thing keeping you from the life you want is the war happening inside your own head. Psychologists call it the monkey mind. This restless, jumping, frantic, endlessly dissatisfied part of you that leaps from branch to branch, never still, never satisfied, always hungry for a bigger banana, always anxious, always overwhelmed, always chasing the next distraction, the next comfort, the next relief from the discomfort of becoming who you actually want to be. The monkey mind is what reaches for the phone first thing in the morning before you've even decided who you're going to be that day. The monkey mind is what talks you out of the gym after you've already put your shoes on. The monkey mind is what makes you start and stop and start and stop and start and stop, and then tells you the story that you're just not that kind of person. That discipline is for other people, that some people are just built differently. You've heard that lie. You may have believed it for years. David Goggins was not born into discipline. He was born into violence and poverty and abuse. He was overweight, suffering, barely functioning. He became one of the most physically and mentally disciplined human beings in recorded history. A Navy SEAL, an Army Ranger, an ultramarathon runner who completed over 60 endurance races, a man who holds the world record for pull-ups. He didn't find discipline in a book or a seminar. He built it in the absolute darkness of who he was. Against everything that should have broken him, he built it. Virat Kohli was a talented cricketer who nearly had his career derailed by his own inability to control his impulses, his diet, his temper, his inconsistency under pressure. He rewired himself completely. He became not just one of the greatest batsmen alive, but a symbol of what self-discipline does to raw talent. It doesn't restrict it. It multiplies it. Ronaldo, a boy from Madeira with a heart condition, who by all reasonable medical expectation should never have been a professional footballer at all. He trained when his teammates had gone home. He trained when no one was watching. He made himself into the body and the athlete and the champion that the world now takes for granted, not because greatness fell from the sky, but because he made 10,000 disciplined choices that everyone else decided not to make. Less than 1% of people are born with extraordinary natural gifts. Genius, savant-level ability that requires no effort. That is less than 1%. For the rest of us, for 99% of every human being who has ever wanted something more than what they were handed, the path to greatness runs directly through self-discipline. There is no other road. There are no shortcuts that don't eventually loop back to the same place. And every shortcut you take today is a debt you will pay with interest tomorrow. But here's the part nobody tells you. Here's the part that Brian Tracy discovered in those long nights of reading and reflection, and that Jack Johnson understood standing in that blood-stained boxing ring, and that Goggins forged in the absolute furnace of his own suffering. Self-control is not about suppressing what you feel. It is about deciding what you do with what you feel. There is a difference, a critical, life-altering difference between being controlled by your emotions and being informed by them, between reacting and responding, between the fighter who throws punches in anger and the champion who waits patient as stone for the moment that matters. Jack Johnson felt the hatred in that arena. Of course he felt it. He was human. He felt the pain of that split lip. He felt the injustice of the cheating, the boos, the threats. But he had made a decision. This is their burden to carry, not mine. He had decided somewhere deep and unshakable that the noise outside could not be allowed to override the silence he had cultivated inside. And that silence, that extraordinary earned practice silence, was the most lethal weapon in the ring. Think about your own life right now. Think about the places where you keep losing the fight. The morning alarm you keep silencing. The work you keep postponing. The habit you keep breaking. The version of yourself you keep promising. You'll become next Monday, next month, next year. Think about the last time someone's opinion of you derailed your entire week. Think about the last time discomfort talked you out of doing something you knew you needed to do. You are losing fights you should be winning. Not because you don't have what it takes, not because the odds are too high, but because you have never been taught how to build the one thing that changes every other thing. The one foundation upon which every dream, every achievement, every version of yourself that you've ever wanted to be must be built. The ancient philosophers knew this. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor who ran the greatest empire in the world while fighting wars on multiple fronts, while watching his children die, while managing courtiers who plotted against him every single day, Marcus Aurelius wrote about this in his private journals, not for publication, not for posterity, for himself. And what he kept returning to again and again was this: you cannot control what happens to you. You can only control how you respond to it. He wrote about stripping away the fantasy of expectation, the idea that the world should behave the way you want it to. Because the moment you let go of that fantasy, something enormous happens. Your energy stops bleeding out into resentment and frustration and powerlessness and starts flowing, clean and focused toward the only thing you can actually change: yourself. That is where all real power lives. Not in changing other people. Not in waiting for circumstances to improve. Not in hoping motivation will show up like a house guest who keeps canceling. The power lives in the one place you have never been forced to truly look: inside. And I want to take you there, not with empty inspiration, not with a speech that fires you up for 48 hours and then fades. I want to take you into the actual mechanics of this, the real, practical, tested, ancient and modern science of how self-control is built, how it works in your brain, why it keeps failing, and exactly what you need to do differently, starting not next Monday, starting not after the holidays, starting not someday, starting now. But first, there is something you need to understand about yourself that most people spend their entire lives never confronting, a truth so uncomfortable that the mind instinctively builds walls around it, a truth that explains every time you've self-sabotaged, every promise you've broken to yourself, every night you lay awake wondering why, despite everything you know, despite everything you've tried, you still feel like you're spinning in place. It starts with a question. What if the problem isn't your willpower? What if it isn't your motivation? What if it isn't even your discipline? What if the problem is the story you have been telling yourself every single day about who you are? The story you tell yourself about who you are, that's where it all starts. That is the beginning of everything, the root system under every success you've had and every failure that's haunted you. You think discipline is about schedules and willpower and cold showers? And those things matter, they do. But underneath all of that, deeper than any habit or routine or system, there is a story, running on a loop, day and night, quiet enough that most people never hear it consciously, but loud enough that it shapes every single choice they make. I'm the kind of person who always quits. I'm not naturally disciplined. I've tried this before and it never works. That's just who I am. That story. That one. The one you've been quietly narrating to yourself in the dark for years. That story is not the truth. It is a habit, a deeply worn groove in your thinking, carved by repetition and reinforced by every time you accepted it without pushing back. And the terrifying thing, the thing that should light a fire inside you right now, is that you have been building your life on top of that story without ever once stopping to ask whether it was even true. There are two people standing in front of a cigarette. Someone offers them both a smoke, and the first person says, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." And the second person says, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker." Read that again. Because the difference between those two sentences is the difference between a life that changes and a life that stays exactly the same. The first person is fighting against their own identity. Every time they resist, it costs them something: willpower, energy, resolve. They are dragging themselves towards something they want, but they are doing it while still believing deep down that they are the kind of person who smokes. So of course it's hard. Of course they relapse. Of course they feel like they're always losing the battle. They are. The second person doesn't have a battle because they changed the story first. That is the shift. The real shift. Not the alarm clock. Not the gym membership. Not the notebook or the routine or the 5-step system. The shift that changes everything is the moment you stop trying to change your behavior from the outside and start rebuilding your identity from the inside. The moment you stop fighting who you are and start deciding who you're going to be. James Clear, who spent years studying the science of how habits actually form and stick, puts it plainly: you don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your identity. And until your identity changes, nothing else will hold. So let me ask you something direct, something I want you to sit with for a moment. Who do you think you are right now? Not who you want to be. Not who you were told you could be. Not the version of yourself you present to the world on good days. Who do you actually believe yourself to be when the alarm goes off and you're tired? When the opportunity shows up and fear is louder than desire? When you're alone with no one watching and the easy choice is right there in front of you like an open door? Because that person, the one who answers that question honestly, that is the person your discipline is actually built for or not built for. And until that person changes the story they're carrying, no system on earth will hold. Here is what identity change actually looks like in practice. It is not a moment. It is not a declaration. It is not a revelation that arrives like lightning and rewires you overnight. It is smaller than that. It is so much smaller than that. And that is exactly what makes it possible. Every single time you make a choice that aligns with the person you want to become, you cast a vote for that identity. Every morning you get up when you said you would, you cast a vote. Every time you put down the phone and do the work instead, you cast a vote. Every time you eat the meal you planned instead of the one you craved, you cast a vote. None of these votes alone decides the election. But votes accumulate, and slowly, not dramatically, not cinematically, but slowly and then suddenly, the person who exists in your body starts to match the person you've been voting for. But here is where most people misunderstand this. They think the votes have to be enormous. They think they have to overhaul everything at once. Wake up at 5, work out for an hour, meditate, journal, cold shower, read, plan the day, eat perfectly, hustle for 12 hours and fall asleep feeling like they conquered the world. And for about 3 days that works. It feels like momentum. It feels like transformation. And then reality shows up. A bad night's sleep, a hard conversation, a moment of real weakness, and the whole tower collapses. And they tell themselves the story again. See, I knew I couldn't do it. The problem wasn't effort. The problem was volume. Think about 2 plants. You take the first plant, and on day 1, you pour 50 liters of water straight into the soil. Just flood it. Give it everything at once. That plant doesn't flourish. It drowns. The roots can't absorb what they haven't been built to hold, and the whole thing dies from too much too soon. But the second plant, you give it 1 liter a day, every single day, consistent, quiet, unimpressive, in any individual moment. And over 50 days, that plant has roots, deep ones, strong ones. The kind that can actually hold something when the storms come. Discipline works the same way. It is not built in heroic surges. It is built in invisible daily deposits, so small they barely feel like anything until the day you realize you've become someone who doesn't even have to fight the battle anymore, because the person you've become doesn't want to lose. The Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world, rising more than 2,000 feet above the desert, is not held up by its height. It is held up by what's beneath it. Its foundation goes 164 feet into the ground, nearly twice its own height, buried in darkness, invisible to everyone who stands in its shadow. They spent more than a year building just the foundation. 1 year before a single floor went up, before a single window went in, before anyone could see what was being built. And if that foundation had been weak, if they had rushed it, if they had cut corners in the invisible part, then all that steel and glass above it wouldn't be a landmark. It would be a disaster. Your daily discipline is that foundation. The invisible part, the unglamorous, unfilmed, unshared, unremarkable, daily commitment to doing what you said you do, even when you don't feel like it. No one will applaud that hour of focused work you did at 10 at night when everyone else was asleep. No one will hand you a trophy for the meal you chose, the phone you put down, the excuse you didn't make. But those invisible moments are load-bearing. Everything you ever want to build will rest on top of them. And if you skip them, if you keep waiting for motivation to arrive before you start, the foundation never gets laid and the tower never rises. This is what Brian Tracy understood. After those years of laboring in factories and hotels and long-haul jobs, he didn't wait to feel inspired. He didn't wait for someone to see his potential and unlock a door. He woke up 1 hour earlier every single morning, and he worked on himself, reading, studying, asking questions, building something no one around him could see yet. An hour a night, an hour before dawn, every week asking the same question: how can I be better? Not why hasn't anyone noticed me yet? Not when is my break gonna come? Just how can I be better? And over years of that invisible work, the results became impossible to ignore. Earl Nightingale once said that if you spent 1 hour every day focused on one single subject for 5 years, you would become one of the most knowledgeable people in the world on that topic. 1 hour every day, 5 years, that is not a sacrifice. That is a choice. And it is a choice that is available to every single person alive, regardless of where they started or what they were handed or what they didn't get. John Maxwell heard that idea when he was 26 years old and decided he wanted to become a leader. Not just someone who led, but a student of leadership. Someone who understood it from the inside out. So he committed 1 hour a day, reading about leadership, talking to leaders, asking the kind of questions that most people are too proud or too afraid to ask. And for the first few years, he would count down 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, thinking about the finish line. But then something happened halfway through. Somewhere in the quiet repetition of that daily hour, he stopped asking, how long will it take? And started asking, how far can I go? That shift from a goal mindset to a growth mindset changed everything. Because growth has no ceiling. And when you stop measuring yourself by how close you are to the finish line and start measuring yourself by how much further you can reach than yesterday, something in you unclenches. Something becomes possible that was closed before. Now here is the part that costs something to say honestly. Most people will never make that shift. Not because they can't, not because they don't have what it takes, but because making that shift requires something they are quietly, desperately, chronically addicted to avoiding: discomfort. There is a sentence that has derailed the potential of millions of people. Just 5 words. You know it. You've said it. Maybe you said it this morning. I don't feel like it. 5 words. And a whole life on pause. But there is a different sentence. 5 words again, with 4 more added at the end. I don't feel like it, but I'll do it anyway. That is not a motivational line. That is not a catchphrase. That is the actual, literal, unglamorous, unsexy engine of every meaningful thing that human beings have ever built or become. Discipline is not the ability to always feel ready. Discipline is the ability to act in spite of not feeling ready. It is the gap between your feelings and your actions. The moment you choose your future self over your present comfort. And that gap crossed 10,000 times over thousands of ordinary days is what the rest of the world calls talent. The astronauts who go to space. Those men and women sitting in a sealed metal cylinder tens of thousands of feet above the earth, where a single system's failure could kill them all and no one can come to help. What is the first and most critical skill they are trained in before anything else? Before navigation, before physics, before piloting, before any of the technical expertise you'd expect. They are trained in one thing: how not to panic, how to hold self-control when every instinct in the human brain is screaming for surrender. And the way they are trained is not through philosophy or pep talks. It is through exposure. Day after day, they are put inside simulated crises, 20% oxygen remaining, engine failure, pressure leak, and they practice. They practice feeling the panic and choosing the protocol anyway. They practice being afraid and being functional at the same time. They build the muscle of calm by repeatedly refusing to let chaos win. And that is exactly what you need to understand about discipline. It is a muscle, not a personality trait, not a gene you either have or don't have, not something that certain people were born with that you somehow missed. It is a skill built through repetition, through exposure to discomfort, through the daily practice of choosing the harder thing when the easier thing is right there smiling at you. Every time your brain throws up that feeling, I don't want to, I'm tired, just this once, one day won't matter, that feeling is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that the rep is available. The moment you don't want to is exactly the moment the muscle grows. And if you always wait until you feel ready, if you always wait until the conditions are perfect and the motivation is high and the path is clear, you will wait your entire life. Because those conditions do not spontaneously arrive. You create them through the work you do on the days they feel impossible. David Goggins, and I want you to really sit with what this man has built himself into from absolute nothing. From a childhood of violence and poverty and abuse, from a body that science said was not equipped for elite military performance, carries what he calls a cookie jar, not a literal one, a mental one. Inside that cookie jar is every hard thing he has ever survived, every race he ran on broken legs, every SEAL training evolution he finished when the men beside him quit, every moment he chose forward when backward would have been so much easier, and when life puts him in a moment of real pressure, when the darkness comes and the body is giving out and the mind is looking for an exit, he reaches into that jar. He reminds himself of what he has already survived. He reminds himself who he already is. And that reminder resets him, grounds him, sends him back into the fight with something deeper than motivation, with proof. Because motivation lies to you. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings come and go like weather. You cannot build a life on a feeling. Motivation will be there when the project is exciting and new, when people are watching and applauding, when success feels close enough to taste. But motivation goes quiet at 3 a.m, when the work is boring and the results are invisible and nobody cares. And that is precisely when the work matters most. What you need in that moment is not a feeling. It is a decision made in advance, inscribed in something deeper than mood, a decision about who you are, and a cookie jar full of proof that you have already been that person before, even on days when it cost you everything to hold the line. Here is the practical edge of this. Here is where it gets real. Mel Robbins, who figured out this truth by accident in the worst period of her own life, when she couldn't get out of bed, when her marriage was breaking, when every morning was a negotiation between the life she had and the life she knew she needed, discovered something about how the brain actually works in the 5-second window between intention and action. The moment you have an impulse to do something, get up, make the call, start the work, say the thing, you have exactly 5 seconds before your brain kicks into a different gear, before it starts generating reasons, excuses, alternatives, risks, before the hesitation calcifies into inaction. 5 seconds. And if you count backward in those 5 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, something happens in the brain. You interrupt the pattern, you activate the prefrontal cortex. You cut off the habit loop and force a new command, not through willpower, through interruption. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you move. Before the negotiation starts, before the excuses have time to build their case. This sounds too simple. It sounds almost embarrassing in its simplicity. But simple is not the same as easy, and simple is not the same as weak. The most powerful forces in the world are often devastatingly simple. Gravity is simple, fire is simple, and the 5-second gap between the life you're living and the life you're capable of, that is simple too. You just have to be the one who moves. But moving is only the beginning. Because here is the thing nobody wants to talk about in all these conversations about discipline and self-control. Moving gets you started. Identity keeps you going. And environment determines whether any of this holds when the pressure is real. Your environment is not neutral. You have been told your whole life that what matters is what happens inside your head, your mindset, your attitude, your inner fire. And yes, all of that matters deeply. But the world around you is speaking to you constantly, shaping your behavior in ways so subtle you don't even notice them happening. The phone sitting face up on the desk is not just a phone. It is a decision trap. Every time your eyes catch it, even peripherally, even for a fraction of a second, it costs you something. Attention, focus, the thread of a thought you'll never quite pick back up. The apps on that phone were designed by some of the most sophisticated behavioral scientists alive to keep you looking, to exploit the same reward circuits in your brain that cigarettes and gambling exploit. This is not an accident. This is an architecture deliberately built around your weakest impulses. You cannot out willpower an environment built to defeat you. No one can. What you can do is rebuild the environment. If a plant cannot grow in poisoned soil, if you cannot plant an apple seed in concrete and expect anything to rise, then why do you keep expecting your discipline to flourish in a space engineered to destroy it? The phone near your bed, the notifications, the chaos on your desk, the people around you who mistake motion for progress and busyness for meaning. You cannot become who you need to become inside the same environment that produced who you currently are. Something in that environment has to change. Not everything. You don't need to burn your life down and start over, but something. Because when you change your environment, you change the default, and discipline that lives in the default, discipline that becomes automatic, environmental, structural, is infinitely more powerful than discipline that requires a daily heroic act of will. Marcus Aurelius understood this 2,000 years ago, sitting in a palace with every comfort available to him, surrounded by people who would have given him whatever he asked for, whenever he asked for it. The easiest thing in the world for a Roman emperor would have been to slide, to let the days become soft, to let the appetites run. He had the power to do exactly that, and no one would have stopped him. But every morning, before the court awoke, before the demands of empire arrived, Marcus wrote to himself, not for publication, not for reputation, just to himself, holding himself accountable to the person he had decided to be. Give up the fantasy of expectation. He wrote, you control your response, you control your action, you control nothing else, and that is enough. That is stoic self-control in its purest form. Not the suppression of feeling, but the refusal to let feeling drive the vehicle. Not the elimination of difficulty, but the decision to face it squarely and without drama. To ask of every hard moment the same two questions. What here is truly beyond my control? And what can I actually do right now? Accept the first, act on the second. Everything else is noise. This is the pivot point. This is the exact place where the people who actually change separate from the people who stay locked in the cycle of intention and regret. They stop pouring their energy into what cannot be changed, and they pour everything into the territory they actually own. Their mornings, their habits, their choices, their words, their response to the world, not the world itself, not other people, not the past, but their response. That is the territory. That is where all the real power lives. And here is where the strategy becomes something you can actually feel. Stanford professor Phil Zimbardo spent decades studying how people orient themselves in time. And what he found should shake you. People who live primarily in the past, who define themselves by who they used to be, what they failed at before, what they didn't have growing up, they almost never develop lasting discipline because they are running a story that ends before it begins. People who live entirely in the present, chasing every sensation, every comfort, every immediate reward, they burn bright and burn out. They are the ones who can sustain discipline for 3 days, maybe 3 weeks before the novelty fades and the craving for easy wins. But the people who develop genuine, deep, unshakable self-control, they have learned to live with their eyes oriented toward the future, not daydreaming, not fantasizing, oriented, calculating. Every choice they make today is made through the lens of who they are becoming. They can feel the discomfort of the gym because they can also feel the strength they are building. They can sit in the boredom of deep work because they can sense the mastery forming underneath it. They have found a way to make the future real enough that the present discomfort becomes a price worth paying rather than a reason to stop. Jim Carrey understood this before he had $1 to his name. Broke, living in a van with his family in Los Angeles, trying to make it as a comedian in a city full of people, trying to make it as something. He took a napkin one day and he wrote himself a check for $10 million, post-dated it 10 years into the future for acting services rendered. And he put it in his wallet. Every single time he opened that wallet to pay for a meal he could barely afford, to buy gas for a car that barely ran, to sit in a waiting room hoping someone would give him a chance, he saw the check. He saw his future made physical. He kept the future alive in the present so that the present could serve the future rather than consume it. 10 years later, just before the date written on that check, he signed a contract for a film called Dumb and Dumber for exactly $10 million. Call it what you want. Visualization, faith, manifestation, delusional optimism. Call it whatever helps you understand it. But what Jim Carrey actually did was something concrete and neurologically real. He kept his why visible. He made his reason for enduring the discomfort of discipline impossible to forget. Because when the reason is clear and alive and present, the discipline flows from it naturally. You don't drag yourself to the work. You are pulled toward it by something that matters more than comfort. And this is the last thing I want to leave you with before everything changes. The ancient Upanishads, one of the oldest bodies of human wisdom on earth, described discipline not as a strategy or a system, but as a feeling. They called it sankalp, resolve. And they said that resolve is an emotion, just like happiness or sadness or love. And like any emotion, it can be cultivated, practiced, grown stronger through repetition. Every time you feel it, that moment when you decide not to eat the thing, not to check the phone, not to let the impulse win, you are not just making a decision. You are training an emotion. You are teaching your body what resolve feels like. And the more you recognize it, the more you feel it, the more you fuel it with daily intention, the stronger it becomes. Until discipline stops feeling like something you do and starts feeling like something you are. That's where we're going. That's what all of this is building toward. But here's the thing nobody prepares you for. The thing waiting on the other side of the identity shift. The daily discipline, the rebuilt environment, the clear reason and the quiet resolve. The real battle. The one that happens not at the beginning, when everything is fresh and the decision feels clean, but in the middle. In the long, unglamorous, invisible middle. When the results haven't come yet. When the people around you aren't seeing it. When the progress is too slow to feel real. And the only thing keeping you in the game is something so deep inside you that you can barely name it. That's where most people break. Not at the starting line, not at the finish line. In the middle, the middle. Nobody talks about the middle. They talk about beginnings, the moment of decision, the fresh start, the dramatic turn. They talk about endings, the finish line, the achievement, the transformation complete. Books are written about both. Speeches are given about both. The beginning is electric. The ending is glorious. But the middle is where you're 3 weeks into the new habit and the initial fire has died down and the results aren't showing yet And nobody is asking how it's going anymore because the novelty wore off for them too. The middle is where the alarm goes off at 5 in the morning and it's cold and dark and your body is tired in a way that sleep can't seem to fix, and there is nothing, no motivation, no inspiration, no crowd, no applause. There is nothing standing between you and the decision to stop except the quiet, stubborn, private voice inside you that whispers, "Not today." The middle is where champions are made and where everybody else goes home. The middle is the whole game. And here is the truth about the middle that nobody is honest enough to say out loud. It never fully gets easy. The people you look at from the outside, the ones who seem disciplined without effort, who seem to move through life with a kind of focused clarity that feels almost supernatural. They didn't find a way to make the middle comfortable. They found a way to make it meaningful. That's all. That's the entire secret. They found a reason large enough that the discomfort of the middle became a price they were genuinely willing to pay. Every single day, whether they felt like it or not. You want to know what separates the ones who make it from the ones who don't? It's not talent. We've established that. It's not intelligence. It's not connections or luck or privilege or timing. Those things matter at the margins, but they are not the engine. The engine is this. The people who make it through the middle have really decided, in the quiet, unwitnessed chambers of their own character, that their failure and their success belongs to them, not to their circumstances, not to the people who hurt them, not to the economy or the system or the hand they were dealt, to them, completely, finally, irreversibly. Your failure is on you. Your success is on you. Read that again, not as an accusation, as a liberation, because the moment you take full ownership of your results, you take back full ownership of your power. As long as you believe that what happens to you is primarily caused by forces outside you, you will wait for those forces to change before you change. You will wait your entire life. But the moment you accept that you are the variable, the one factor in every equation that you can actually adjust, everything opens up. The door you've been standing in front of, wondering who holds the key, has been unlocked from the inside all along. You cannot win the war against the world if you cannot first win the war against your own mind. That is not a motivational line. That is a clinical fact. Your mind is where every battle actually happens. Not in the job interview room or the gym or the relationship or the boardroom. In your mind, in the seconds before you enter any of those places. In the story you are running about who you are and what you're capable of and whether you deserve the thing you're walking toward. Win that war and every other battlefield becomes survivable. Lose it, and it doesn't matter where you go or what opportunities find you, you will find a way to sabotage them, because somewhere inside you still believes you don't really belong to the life you say you want. But here is what I need you to understand, and I mean this with everything I have. You have already proven that you are capable of something extraordinary. You have. Every single one of you watching this has a cookie jar. You just haven't been reaching into it. You've been so focused on the losses, the relapses, the times you fell short of who you said you'd be, that you've forgotten every single hard thing you have already survived, the heartbreak you got through, the failure that felt permanent but wasn't, the day everything collapsed, and somehow, slowly, piece by piece, you put yourself back together anyway. The year that nearly broke you, the one that didn't, you are still here. That is not nothing, that is everything. Reach into that jar. Remind yourself who you already are, underneath the story you've been telling. A samurai named Miyamoto Musashi, one of the most formidable warriors in Japanese history, undefeated in over 60 duels, a man who fought with the kind of controlled ferocity that became legend, spent the last years of his life writing down everything he had learned, not about sword technique, not about fighting, about the mind, about self-control, as the foundation beneath every skill, every craft, every form of mastery. He understood that a single uncontrolled emotion in the heat of a duel was not a weakness of the body. It was a death sentence. The warrior who reacted from feeling rather than from discipline lost everything in one unguarded moment. All the training, all the preparation, all the potential, gone in the flash of one uncontrolled impulse. That is still true. Not in duels now, in the quiet fights of your daily life. In the moment you react instead of respond. In the moment you choose comfort over growth. In the moment you decide, once again, that you'll start tomorrow instead of starting right now. Every unguarded moment is a small death. Every surrendered discipline is a sword laid down. And the accumulated weight of all those surrendered moments, that is how people arrive at 50 or 60 or on their last day and realize that the life they wanted was always right there, always possible, always within reach, and they simply chose comfort instead, one small choice at a time, until the choices hardened into a life they never actually chose. The Dalai Lama says it quietly, without drama. When you lose, don't lose the lesson. That is the discipline of loss. Perhaps the hardest kind there is. Not the discipline of the good days. Not the discipline of the mornings when you're rested and motivated and the plan feels clear and the future feels close. The discipline of the bad days. The discipline of the day you fell. The discipline of picking up what the failure taught you and refusing to leave it on the floor alongside your pride, because regret, unprocessed, wallowed in, repeated on a loop, is not feeling. Regret is an uncontrolled emotion that eats the very future it claims to mourn. It pulls you backward into a room that no longer exists and keeps you there, rehearsing pain that cannot be changed, while the life that is still possible sits waiting just outside the door. The samurai knew this, the philosopher knows this, and somewhere inside you, underneath the self-criticism and the exhaustion and the story about who you are, you know this too. So let it go. Not because the pain wasn't real, not because the failures didn't matter. Let it go because the lesson has already been paid for in full with everything it cost you, and carrying the receipt around for the rest of your life does not honor the price. It wastes it. Now, right now, this is where the shift happens. Not in some distant future version of your life, when the circumstances are better and you finally feel ready. Here, in this exact moment, with whatever you have and wherever you are, and however tired you feel, and however many times you've tried before, the shift happens the moment you decide, clearly, quietly, without fanfare, that the person you have been is no longer the person you're willing to remain. Think about what you're actually capable of. Not in the abstract, comfortable way we sometimes let ourselves imagine capability. Not as a daydream. Think about it concretely. Brian Tracy was told to his face by someone in authority that he wasn't even qualified to operate a machine. He didn't know how to read well enough for a basic factory floor job. And he went on to build 65 car dealerships, 200 crores in annual sales, 8 companies running simultaneously, not because the world suddenly decided to give him a chance, but because he decided every single morning to demand more from himself than the day before. He read when he could have rested. He studied when he could have quit. He asked questions when pride would have told him to pretend he already knew. One quiet, unimpressive, invisible hour at a time. He built the life that the factory foreman told him he wasn't good enough to dream about. And you, what have you been told you're not good enough for? What room have you been kept out of? Not by a locked door, but by the story someone else handed you that you accepted and carried and eventually mistook for your own? Because I want to tell you something about that story. It was never yours. It was given to you by someone who was afraid, by someone who was limited, by someone who couldn't imagine something bigger for themselves and so couldn't imagine it for you either. Fear always tries to make itself universal. Pain always tries to convince you it's permanent. And the people who hand you that story, they are not your enemy. They are just people who lost their own war against their own mind. And like all of us, they were passing on what they knew. But you don't have to carry it any further. The concert pianist who plays on a world stage, who makes music that moves people to tears, who performs with a freedom and an expression that looks from the outside like pure natural gift. That pianist spent several thousand hours in a small room, alone, playing the same passage over and over and over again, getting it wrong, getting it less wrong, getting it right, getting it wrong again. Discipline, deliberate, invisible repetition, imposing order on potential, one painstaking hour at a time. That is not prison. That is the price of the freedom that comes out the other side. And what comes out the other side, what grows from that root system of invisible discipline, is something so much larger than the sacrifice that planted it. The freedom is always proportional to the discipline. Always. You cannot shortcut this equation. You can only choose whether to make the deposits or to spend the rest of your life wondering why the account stays empty. You are not stuck. You are not broken. You are not too late. And you are not too far behind. And you are not fundamentally different from the people whose discipline you admire. You are someone who has not yet made the decision that changes everything. Or maybe you've made it before and the middle broke you and you came back here looking for a reason to try again. Here is your reason. The state of your attention is the state of your life. That is not a metaphor. It is the most practical thing I know. Where your attention goes consistently, deliberately, daily. That is where your life goes. It accumulates. It compounds. The minutes you reclaim from distraction, the mornings you protect before the noise gets in, the choices you make in the 5-second window before your brain builds a cage around your impulse, those minutes, those mornings, those choices are not small. They are everything. They are the invisible architecture of every outcome you'll ever live inside. And nobody is coming to build it for you. I know that is hard to hear. I know there's a part of you, the part that is tired, that has been disappointed before, that has watched effort go unrewarded and hope go unanswered. That part of you wants someone to reach into this mess and pull you out, someone to see what you are and meet you where you are and carry some of this weight. And sometimes people do. Sometimes the right person shows up at the right moment and changes the direction of a life. That is real, and it is grace. And if it happens to you, receive it fully. But you cannot build a life on that hope. You cannot suspend your effort waiting for rescue that may never come. Because at some point that is already passed. For most of us, you have to look in the mirror and make the only vow that actually matters. Not to a coach or a mentor or a program or a system, to yourself. To the person in the glass who has been waiting patiently, quietly, sometimes desperately for you to finally show up. That person has not given up on you. Even after everything, even after every broken promise and every fresh start that faded, and every night you went to sleep telling yourself tomorrow would be different and then tomorrow wasn't, they are still there, still waiting, still believing, even when you don't, that the life you want is not a fantasy, it is a direction. And all you have to do is start walking toward it and refuse to stop. Do you understand what you have in your hands right now? You have a mind that can be retrained. Science confirms it. The neural pathways that make your worst habits feel automatic, they are not permanent. They are just deeply worn. And new paths can be carved. Not instantly, not without effort, but carved deliberately, one repeated choice at a time, until the new road becomes the one your mind takes by default. Until discipline stops being a decision and becomes a direction. Until who you are finally matches who you've always known you could be. You have a body that can be pushed further than you think. David Goggins knows something about this, about the moment your body says it's done, and your mind has to decide whether to believe it. He found what he calls the 40% rule. When your body is screaming that it has nothing left, that it cannot go one step further, that this is the absolute limit, you are at 40% of your actual capacity. 60% is still available, untouched, waiting. You have never once in your life truly found your limit. You have found your comfort zone's edge. That edge and your actual limit are not the same place. They are not even close to the same place. And you have today, this specific, irreplaceable, unrepeatable day, not a metaphorical day, not someday, not Monday, not the first of the month or the start of the new year, or after this last thing resolves itself. Today, the morning you woke up and the evening that's coming, and all the hours between that are still completely open, still full of possibility, still yours to use or to waste, and nobody can make that choice for you. Here is what I want you to do right now. Not eventually, right now, when this ends, find one thing, just one, The one thing you know, you already know, you've always known, that you have been putting off, the thing that lives in the back of your mind, that never fully goes quiet, that taps you on the shoulder in the silence, that you silence with distraction, because starting it means committing to it, and committing to it means you might fail at it, and failing at it means you might have to face who you really are, that thing, that one thing. Write it down, with your hand, on paper, in present tense, not I want to be, but I am, not someday, but now. Because Brian Tracy's student, the salesman stuck at 35 with no salary, no prospects, no clear path, wrote his goal in a notebook every single morning, not looked at it, wrote it, pressed it into the page with his own hand. And 11 years later, he was a partner in a multinational company. He didn't have the skills or the connections or the knowledge when he started. He had the discipline of writing the destination down every morning until his mind accepted it as real, and then his hands moved toward it automatically. Every right conversation, every right opportunity, every right next step appearing in his path because his subconscious had been aimed at it for 11 years. Your subconscious is always listening. It is always recording, and it is always building the life that matches the story you feed it. Feed it the right story deliberately, consistently, in ink on paper before the day begins, and watch what it builds. Then take one step, not the whole journey. The first step, whatever is available to you in this exact moment, the smallest, most immediate movement toward the thing you've been waiting to become. Make the call, open the document, set the alarm, do the first rep, send the message, say the thing, eat the meal, put down the phone, take the step that fear has been blocking with both hands and 100 reasonable sounding excuses. Take it anyway. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Move, because here is what I know about you. And I mean this not as a speech, not as a strategy, but as the truest thing I have found after everything the sources of human wisdom have ever said about what separates the lives people want from the lives they actually live. You are not the person who has failed. You are the person who has survived every single one of their failures and is still here, still watching, still searching for the thing that will finally make it click. That is not weakness. That is the most fundamental form of self-control there is. The refusal to be finished by the things that were supposed to finish you. The refusal to let the losses be the final answer. You have been practicing self-control in the hardest possible arena, in the arena of hope, where you keep showing up even when the evidence says to stop. Now bring that same refusal to the arena that actually matters. Bring it to your mornings. Bring it to your choices. Bring it to the 5 seconds before you surrender to comfort. Bring it to the middle, especially the middle, the long, gray, unglamorous middle, and refuse to let it beat you the way you have refused to let everything else beat you. Jack Johnson stood in that ring in 1910 with the whole world arranged against him, the crowd screaming for his destruction, the referee looking the other way, his lips split and bleeding in the 4th round. And he smiled, not because it didn't hurt, not because the hatred didn't reach him. He smiled because he had already decided somewhere before he ever walked into that arena that the noise outside could not have his peace, that the chaos outside could not have his clarity, that 18,000 people wanting him to break was simply not enough to make him break. And when the match ended, not with his defeat, but with his opponent's surrender, the same 18,000 people who had come to see him destroyed rose to their feet and gave him a standing ovation. Because people always recognize mastery, even when they resent it. Because self-control, at its highest expression, is so rare and so powerful that it is impossible to look away from. Because a human being who is completely at home in themselves, calm in the storm, clear in the chaos, moving with deliberate purpose while everything around them screams, that human being does not need validation. They become something that validation seeks out. That is what is available to you, not as a fantasy, not as a distant destination for a future version of you who has it all together. Now, imperfect and tired and uncertain and still carrying the weight of every time you've tried before and come up short, now exactly as you are. Because the path to becoming who you want to be does not begin when you are ready. It begins the moment you decide you are done waiting to be ready. You have the cookie jar. You have the 5 seconds. You have the identity waiting to be chosen, and the sankalp, that burning resolve waiting to be lit and tended and grown into a fire that nothing can extinguish. You have the morning that is still coming. You have the mind that can be won. You have the body that has 60% left when it swears it's empty. You have everything you need. You have always had everything you need. The only question, the only one that has ever mattered, the only one that will be answered, not in what you say, but in what you do in the next 5 minutes, and the 5 after that, and every ordinary invisible morning that follows. The only question is this: are you finally ready to stop losing the war inside your own head? Because the moment you win that war, every other fight becomes possible. Now go win it.